Hi, everybody. Wake up, Patriots. I'm Larry Schweikart filling in for Ed Henry here on the morning show on the first hour. Welcome, welcome. This is the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Just an incredible event, incredible exercise in manpower, courage, manufacturing, intelligence, every which way you want to go. It was really an astounding event. And, I hear a lot as a historian, well, people today could never do that. That was the greatest generation, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in part, they were the greatest generation because they were given the opportunity to be the greatest generation in a way that they could clearly act and clearly respond. We never know what we can do till we are tested. And our tests have been much, much different and much more subtle and, shall we say, less unifying. We have never really, after Ronald Reagan killed off communism, we have never had a time in history, except for that brief moment after 9/11, lasted about 6 months, where Americans could truly understand the threat. It's hard to get people aroused about a $32 trillion national debt. You know this is bad. I know this is bad, but it's just not the kind of unifying factor, the kind of galvanizing factor that brings people up out of their seats and rushing to join a cause. So I don't lay at the feet of other generations. Well, they never could have done that. I think we don't know. But we'll see. We're coming up on a time where people are going to have to stand up. So let's just get into it. First of all, I know you're interested in the fallout of the Trump verdicts, the 34-count guilty verdict. As I predicted, there would be little change. As of yesterday, Trump had gained 1 point in some polls and lost 1 point in other polls. Overall, I think he's lost about 1 point generically and is still leading by about 1 point. Richard Barris, America's best pollster, big data poll, People's Pundit Daily, he has not weighed in yet, so we kind of don't know where he is. And I don't think the New York Times, Siena has weighed in. Their last poll was absolutely brutal for Biden, the swing state poll that they did. YouGov had Biden up 1, but Trump had gained 1. Emerson came out today. Trump is up overall 1 point, but lost a point. Act Vote, Trump gained a point and is up 4 nationally. Polls in Georgia show President Trump up 5, and in North Carolina show him up 8. Those are very solid numbers. YouGov had Biden up 1, Trump gained 1. In other words, if there was a shift of a point, it didn't change who the leader was in most of these cases. But what about the betting markets? Well, Polymarket has President Trump at 56% chance to win, which rose slightly after the convictions. Now, a lot of Biden disapproval out there. I mean, one of the things that stands out in all this polling is how this man is just, I wouldn't say despised. I don't see yet, unfortunately, I don't see a lot of hatred for Biden here. I see a lot of people just get him out, get him away. He's terrible for the country. He's just bad. And so he's hit 34% approval in one poll, which overall has been his lowest ever. Now, I can go back I've been following this for 3 years. I could go back about a year and a half ago, and there was one poll that had him at 29%, a real outlier. He never came close to that in any of the other polls. But 34% by a good pollster, approval rating, that's curtains for any sitting president. And no president has ever gotten elected with that low of an approval rating. So keep your eyes on that, not just the head-to-head with Trump. because when you get into a voting booth in November, you're going to have a lot of the famous undecideds, which I think now are fairly low. I think you're going to have a lot of those going. I just can't go with the guy who's in there now. I'll try somebody else. I think Barris would agree that the number of undecideds out there is smaller than normal, that people pretty much pick sides. And that's why you see these polls are always within about a 2-point range, is because it's getting harder and harder to move those last 8 or 10 percentage points. Now, what Barris and many others do is they push them. That is, they eliminate all other options. They say, if these are your only two options and you absolutely had to make a choice between these two, where would you go? And when you add the leaners, Trump is over 50% in most of these polls, which is, again, curtains for the opponent, because obviously when you're over 50, you've won. You might remember back in 2016, if any of you still remember that race, Barris and one other pollster, Trafalgar, were incredibly accurate. And what Trafalgar did, and Barris did not, they had a question. Obviously, who would you vote for? But they also had a question, who do you think your neighbor will vote for? And in that way, Trafalgar was able to extract what they called the shy Trump voter, somebody who feels it's socially unacceptable to say you're voting for Trump. But in all those cases, the numbers for President Trump went up because people say, oh, my neighbor is voting for Trump. Of course, I don't know yet. See, so they've been doing that a lot this time around. And those numbers, again, look very, very good for Trump. Now, let's just go over a few of these state approval numbers for Biden, because these are just critical, okay? In Arizona, Biden's at 30% approval. In Nevada, 32%. You think he's going to carry Nevada if he's only at 32% approval? 31% in Georgia, 33% in Michigan, 34% in Pennsylvania, and his highest among the swing states is 41% in Wisconsin. He's not even above 50% in his very best state in the swing states. So these are just total loser numbers. And they indicate what kind of trouble Biden is in. So you've heard about fundraising. Now, I did not know this until this cycle, that fundraising is considered one of the fundamentals when you look at things other than polling. For example, you have this guy, Alan Lishman, who always has the, whatever it is, 9 keys or 11 keys. He has some kind of predictive method that he says Biden will win. Well, one of those keys is fundraising. And if you look at what happened last week in the wake of the court decision, Trump's fundraising has been off the charts. They raised $70 million off of donors who were $50 or less donors. That's mind-boggling. That alone would be an incredible number. But then they raised a total of $200 million from all donors. Then Trump went out to California, and he went out for a fundraiser in San Francisco, or as I affectionately call it, Groomer City. And in San Francisco, the contribution for the fundraiser started at $50,000 and went up to $500,000 and was sold out. So I have a feeling that Trump's fundraising is just going to be off the hook from here on out, and that he's going to absolutely dwarf Biden when it comes to fundraising. Now, when you put all of this stuff together, I think you're going to have a remarkable story to tell. I have a Substack. Oh, yeah, you can follow me, by the way, at the wildworldofhistory.com or the Wild World of Politics. If you're a homeschooling parent, if you're an educator, follow me at Wild World of History. We have all sorts of free stuff there. Plus, I have full curricula in U.S. and world history for high schoolers, and I teach every single lesson of Patriots history of the United States, all 22 lessons in video. But if you're more interested in the political side, I do political commentary over at the Wild World of Politics 3 days a week, and I get into some of this stuff. But you can also follow me at Substack, and this is what I was getting at, is at my Substack column. I do free columns a couple of times a week, but I also have a subscriber column. And that's where I put all the really detailed analysis, as you say, all the good stuff. It's not any better than some of the other stuff I put on free, but I had one last week that I want to get into here called 6 Months of Hell, because I think that's really what we're looking at when you go through all of these numbers, is 6 months of hell. So let me preface that. I'm going to read you a word from our sponsor, and then I'm going to get into this 6 months of hell. The preface is this. The Democrats had a chance in 2023 to push Biden out and to replace him. The problem was they thought, I think rightly so, that if they pushed him out and replaced him, they were going to replace him with Harris, Kamala Harris. And nobody in the Democrat Party and nobody in the Republican Party wants Harris. Remember, this woman didn't get a single delegate in the primary race against Biden. And I believe that's one of the reasons, besides her being a Black woman, I think that's one of the reasons they were so eager to have her on the ticket, is she was so reviled, so repulsive even to Democrats, that it kept Biden safe. It was a fire insurance policy. So they had a chance to remove him back in 2023 due to any number of ways, just force him to step down. You're too old. I mean, they could have gotten him out if they wanted to, but they would have been stuck with Kamala Harris. And if you gave her a year run up to the nomination, there was no way they could have denied her the nomination. And she got beat in the polls even, even a year ago, worse than Biden did. So they planned from over a year ago to use lawfare. In 2020, 4 years ago, their plan was to use the China virus, COVID, as a cover for the steal, to ballot harvest and send in all these illegal ballots and double mark ballots. I mean, we all know how that goes. I mean, it's not really much of a question anymore. But they didn't think they could steal it this time. Many states passed voter integrity laws, including Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And Republican registrations have soared, and they just didn't think they could steal it again. So late 23, they put everything on this strategy of lawfare. And the lawfare strategy was to tie Trump up in court, so he couldn't campaign. That was their thought at the time. They didn't understand the man's energy. He has more energy than anybody I've ever seen in public life, including Ronald Reagan. You know, the story of Reagan was that he was so active that on Air Force One, he'd be walking up and down the aisles, and all the hoax newsers would be asleep there. And here's Reagan's wide awake and doing business, right? And I have a friend, I think he's passed away now, William Verity, who was Reagan's Secretary of Commerce after Malcolm Baldrige died in a strange horse accident. He was a rider, and he was at a rodeo, and his horse reared up and fell on him, killed him. And so Bill Verity replaced Baldrige. And Verity was not a young man when he went to Washington. And when he met Reagan, he was just astounded. He said, "How do you have so much energy?" And Reagan answered with 2 words, bee pollen. Well, whatever energy that Reagan had, Trump has it 10 times. So their idea that they were going to somehow tie him up and keep him from campaigning, that didn't work. Their other idea was that they would get a conviction. Now, they really believed that the most serious conviction would come in Georgia because that involved insurrection, and they'd be able to tie the insurrection label to President Trump for the ensuing entire campaign. The next most important one was Jack Smith, or as I call him, Count Dooku, because he looks just like the Count Dooku in the Star Wars series. The Jack Smith would get him on the documents case. Interestingly, the one they put the least stock in was this state case out of New York run by Alvin Boast and Bragg. So it's interesting that that's the only one that's come through for them. And I will get into those in just a minute. But it's important. I wanted to lay out the strategy first. Their strategy was they couldn't get rid of Biden. So they were going to do lawfare and remove Trump via lawfare because they couldn't steal it. They didn't think they could steal it again. That's where we are. All right, let me segue to a word from our sponsor here. And our first sponsor is Done with Debt. Man, if you're like me, you want to be done with debt. I swear, there's no more liberating feeling than getting done with debt. And the system kind of traps you in debt. You know how it is. They get these super high interest rates. Thanks, Biden. Thanks for that inflation. And you can barely make the payments, let alone pay off the principal of the debt. So you end up living paycheck to paycheck. Well, Done with Debt might be your lifeline here. Done with Debt has an ingenious new strategy to help you erase that debt, make it go down faster than you thought possible. Done with Debt analyzes all the debt options that you have, everything you qualify for. They know how to reduce bills. They know how to cut interest rates. Their skilled staff of negotiators know how to get in these people's face and get debt permanently down without bankruptcy. You don't want to do that. And without another loan. Done with Debt are the experts, and they have brilliant strategies here for eliminating debt. But hurry, because some of your debt solutions might be sensitive. Every minute you wait, those interest rates pile up. Here's how easy they make it. Go to donewithdebt.com. That's donewithdebt.com. Select VNN, Virginia News Network, VNN. Vigilant News Network, okay? VNN at checkout. That's donewithdebt.com. And see if you don't get out of debt. Boy, would you feel better if you did that. All right, so having prepped you with what they plan to do, they figured out early they were going to be saddled with Biden. They were going to use lawfare because they couldn't cheat their way out again. What does all this mean? Let me give you 3 headlines from the past few weeks. Okay, they may seem unrelated. Scott Ritter, you guys remember him? Scott Ritter was a weapons inspector for the UN or some other international agency. I can't remember who. Big critic of the Bush administration and the whole WMDs thing. Well, he's certainly no Trumper, but he has been a critic of the Biden administration, especially Afghanistan. What happened to old Scott? He was trying to fly to Russia, and they pulled his passport. They wouldn't let him go. All right, let's jump over to our old pal, Alex Jones. Alex, he got that incredible settlement against him from the people at Sandy Hook. He's in bankruptcy right now, but he still is broadcasting. His InfoWars Studios is still up and operating, and as you may know, if you're not done with debt, you may know that bankruptcy can take many years. And so he's still going. Well, one of the bankruptcy officials, without any court order, so he was there illegally, showed up and tried to shut down Alex Jones's studios. And Alex resisted and fortunately was able to keep broadcasting. But this was a raid, if you will, after hours that was trying to shut down one of the most critical voices of Biden. like or dislike Alex Jones, you have to admit that he's been right on a number of things, especially the China virus vax, and that he has been a perpetual critic of Biden. So that's point number two. Point number three, how many of you read the Epoch Times? I find it a great source of news. It's just excellent. Now, I did not know this, but long ago when it was founded, it was started up with money from the Chinese company or Chinese group, the Falun Gong, which was a opponent of the Chi-Coms. And the Chi-Coms hate it very much. And that's why even now you still see a lot of articles in the Epoch Times about China, as President Trump would say. So they're no longer run by the Falun Gong. They no longer are dominated by Falun Gong money. That's been gone a long time. But the Biden administration, the Department of Injustice, because that's what they are no longer a Department of Justice. They're a Department of Injustice, have now gone after the financiers and the backers of the Epoch Times. What do these things have in common? They're lashing out against any kind of dissidents or critics of the administration. Now, here's what I found interesting about this. These are not strategic strikes. You see no broad overarching goal here other than just to smack down people who don't like Biden. You don't see a genius plan that's going to somehow save the election. What I saw here was much different. What I saw was a cornered animal, a rabid animal in a corner, lashing out in all directions without a plan, without a strategy, trying to do as much damage as it possibly could before it was put down. What does that tell you? I think the administration knows, not just thinks, I think they know they're going to lose in November. I think they know they're going to lose pretty dramatically. I mean, recently, Barris and others have said that the total electoral vote's at 312 right now for Trump, but it could go as high as 360 or so. Excuse me. So I think they know, number two, which is what I said earlier, they can't steal it again. That too many mechanisms are in place. Too many public eyes are watching this time. The vote is going to be too big to rig. As President Trump used to say, it's going to swamp them, no pun intended. And I think they know all this. So what you're seeing is this Hitler-esque burning down of the entire country, doing whatever they can to destroy what's left. You remember, I keep saying you remember, I'm assuming some of you are at least my age or maybe within 10, 15 years, that when the Clinton staffers left the White House back in 2001, they pulled all of the W keys off the computer keyboards in the White House. Any of you remember this, or have you ever heard of that? Yeah, they were so vindictive that Al Gore lost that they pulled all the W keys off the keyboards. When the Tsar left Moscow in 1812 with Napoleon approaching, knew he couldn't beat Napoleon, so he burns down Moscow. Now, that was at least partly strategic. The goal was to deny Napoleon food and shelter and everything else. But when the Allies were closing in on Berlin, Hitler just refused to save his people, refused to surrender, said they deserved it. They deserved to die because they didn't live up to his ideal of Germanhood, whatever that was sending teenage boys out into the streets with Panzerfaust bazookas to try to stop Ruski tanks. That's the sense I get here. That's what I said in my column, 6 Months of Hell, is that they are in destructo mode. They are now committed to doing as much destruction to the United States of America as they possibly can before they have to leave in January 2025. But you also see something else, and you're starting to see now fear. Don't you love it? I love the the smell of fear in the morning, right? You're starting to see this in a number of places. Andy McCabe was testifying or in some sort of interview. I can't remember which, and he was, oh, they're going to come after us. And you're starting to get this vibe from them over and over again that the new Trump administration is out for vengeance. Now, let's talk about that for just a minute. I do believe there must be some measure of vengeance here. Justice. Maybe vengeance is the wrong word. Justice. There has to be some level of justice. At some point, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Fallacy, has to be brought up on charges. We now know he intentionally lied multiple times about the efficacy of the vaccine, about the side effects of the vaccine, about where it was created and why, about his role in the gain of function research, about going even further back to his role in the AIDS drugs that killed thousands and that killed a lot of kids in Africa that it was tested on without their approval. At some point, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Fallacy, as I refer to him, he has to be brought up on charges. He can't be allowed to skate on this. Yes, he's an old man. It doesn't matter. At some point, you got to Nuremberg these guys. At some point, you have to have some accountability. You have to get some of these FBI guys who knew exactly what they were doing, that they were engaging in a coup against a duly elected president. I would start with Jim Comey, that sanctimonious you-know-what. But whoever it is, there has to be some measure of justice and vengeance to begin to restore the American system and trust in the American system. Trust in the government is at all-time lows. With good reason. Nobody trusts this government to do the right thing. There was a tremendous interview the other day on CNN, Communist News Network, CNN, and the female host, the hostette, was asking this pollster guy about the latest polling on illegal immigration. I have this in my yesterday's edition of Today's News. If you go to Wild World of Politics, look for it in Today's News, and you can see the clip. And it was awesome. She said, well, what about illegal immigration? How do people feel about who's best able to handle that? Now, she had to add this. Now, we know it depends on how you word the question. And to his credit, the pollster guy they had said, well, no, it doesn't. He says, I've worded the question every way you can possibly word it, and it always comes out the same way. And the gist was that 2 years ago, illegal immigration was at the, 15th or so most important item. Only 1% of the people thought it was the most important item. And now it has jumped to the second most important policy item behind, obviously, the economy. And it's a jump of 14 points, and much larger portions of the American public see illegal immigration as a very, very serious threat. So she was kind of chastised by that. And so she thought she was going to get a win here. She says, well, what about new immigrants, i.e. the illegal criminal alien invaders? Because that's what they are. They're illegal criminal alien invaders. Well, what about the illegal invaders? How do they feel? As if you should care how an invader feels about your policies. But he had an answer, and he said, well, as you see here, by a 3-point margin, they favor Donald Trump over Joe Biden. So even the illegal invaders know Biden's terrible and favor him. So you're starting to see panic set in everywhere because they know there's going to be a Trump victory. They know there's going to be justice. They know they don't have the cheat. And now increasingly, many of them are starting to genuinely fear being put in jail, which is where they should have been in 2016. They, instead of investigating Trump with his Mueller guy, Mulehead as I call him, they should have gone after Hillary. We would have been so much better off if Hillary had served a little time in jail for her role in the Russia hoax, the Russia collusion, which came straight out of her campaign headquarters with her knowledge. Okay. And we'd be so much better off if they'd gone after her. But as even Steve Bannon told me, there was no real commitment after the election to go after her. I had a long talk with Bannon, many long talks, but one talked about going after Hillary. And the view was, we want to get started on our agenda of saving America as fast as possible. We don't want to be occupied with going after the last guys for their criminality. Now, in retrospect, their agenda depended heavily on going after those guys, right? Because it was those guys and the FBI and their underlings that derailed a large part, not all, certainly not even probably most, but derailed some of the Trump agenda. Can you imagine? I always throw this out. I'm jumping around a little bit here. I think the single most disappointing and horrible pick Trump had, he had some, Rex Tillerson, for example, but the absolute worst was Jeff Sessions. Now, I don't want to go into why he did what he did. Nobody seems to know. Bannon doesn't seem to know. Rich Barris doesn't seem to know. There's hints. And as Paul Simon said in his song, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, there's hints and allegations. Is that the one? But the bottom line is Sessions was a disaster for the Trump administration and for America. Not just because he allowed the Russia hoax to continue. But I want you to think about this. Think of all the things that a good attorney general could have done that could have changed the nature of America, even to this day. He could have cracked down on Black Looters Matter. He could have cracked down on fascist so-called Antifa. He could have cracked down on the sanctuary city mayors. Now, in retrospect, that would have done him a favor because all the sanctuary city mayors now are crumbling under the weight of their policies. Nevertheless, it's illegal. It shouldn't have been allowed to happen. And Sessions allowed it all to happen. Virtually every single bad thing legally that happened from 2017 on can be laid at the feet of Jeff Sessions. If you were to put somebody like Ken Paxton in there now, or an Eric Schmidt, or some go-to really strenuously activated attorney general, can you imagine how much different America today would be than it was then? So what's the upshot of all this? The upshot is we're in for 6 months of hell. They are going to rip the W keys off the keyboard. They are going to dismantle as much of the government that is functioning well, not the parts that are functioning badly, but any parts of the government that are functioning well, they're going to dismantle and destroy them over the next 6 months. Watch the military get more woke. Watch more money be diverted to Ukraine. Watch, despite what he said yesterday about the asylum policy, watch the illegal criminal invaders surge even more. Watch crime rates continue to grow. Watch inflation grow more. Have you seen these stories about the restaurants? I'll get to that maybe when we come back from our word from our sponsor. So just be prepared. The good news, the real silver lining in all of this is why they're doing it. And the reason they're doing it, folks, is they know Trump's going to win. They believe Trump's going to win. They believe that there's nothing that they can do right now that will have a lasting impact in terms of policy past 2025. And therefore, they're doing everything in their power to burn the city down before they leave. Well, on that happy note, speaking of burning, let's burn some calories, right? Lean. everybody's talking about the weight loss injections, like Ozempic and that stuff, and the results, and they're so dramatic. And they work by lowering blood sugar and reducing appetite. They also work by giving you diarrhea and other bad side effects, right? But if you need to lose weight and you don't have the money, these things are incredibly expensive, and you don't like weekly shots. I don't. That's why doctors created a weight loss supplement called Lean, and the results are pretty remarkable. Studied ingredients in Lean have been shown to lower your blood sugar. That's very important. Burn fat by converting it to energy, and curb your appetite and cravings so you aren't as hungry. You don't want those ho-hos in the middle of the day like I do. But listen, Lean isn't for a casual dieter with only a few pounds to lose. Doctors at Brickhouse Nutrition created Lean for frustrated dieters who have more than 10 pounds to lose. So and by the way, I think you get into the clinically obese area. So many Americans don't know it, and they're clinically obese because they're over a certain body mass and over a certain weight. So if you need to lose more than 10 pounds, consider Lean. Let's get you started with 25% off and free rush shipping so you can add Lean to your healthy diet and exercise plan. Visit leanvnn.com and enter VNN for your 15% discount. That's a VNN, promo code VNN, or leanvnn.com. So let's get you out of debt. Let's get you fit as a fiddle. All right. Okay. But look, I didn't have this on my list, but we got to mention this. Did you notice some of your favorite restaurants are closing? Rubio's chain is closing some 56 restaurants. I like Rubio's. We have them here in Arizona. Many other major restaurant chains are cutting back drastically, including Cracker Barrel, another one that I really like. Why? Well, first of all, many of the customers never returned after the COVID lockdowns. After the China virus lockdowns, a lot of the restaurants never saw their business come back. Neither did the movie theaters, by the way. That's a totally different story. But a more telling factor, as I'm sure you know, is California and its minimum wage laws that are just $20 an hour. Really for fast food, $20 an hour. So restaurants are going through what one writer called a restaurant apocalypse. And you may be losing a lot of your favorite fast food places and dine-in restaurants because they simply can't afford the impact of the minimum wages in one of the largest states in the country, California. So the here's another point, folks. I wasn't going to bring this up, but the economy ain't getting any better. The Fed decided they can't lower rates. What does that tell you? They believe inflation is still too strong. So we're going to be stuck with 7% home mortgage rates or higher. We're going to be stuck with these very high credit card interest rates or higher. They can't lower interest rates, which means money is going to continue to be tight. I have several friends in banking, and they tell me the banks just aren't lending, that everybody's having to go to venture capitalists or private capital to get their money. So what's the point of all this? The economy is not going to bail out Biden. It can only get worse. And there was a little article the other day, I think it was by Jeffrey Tucker, I'm not sure, on a dip in tax revenues from the last quarter. And it's like, what? Well, if tax revenues are down, the economy's down. And people are not making enough money, and they're not paying taxes, sales taxes, and so on and so forth, quarterly taxes. So the question that ended the column was, are we headed for stagflation? And again, if you're anywhere near my age, you remember those famous years of Jesus Carter, Jimmy Carter. I call him Jesus because he's so pious, I never did nothing wrong. So you remember the famous Carter years, and we had what was called stagflation. What's stagflation? Stagflation is when you have high inflation with low employment or a low economic output, productivity, low GNP. And it was considered by all economists absolutely impossible until Jimmy Carter did it. It was considered impossible because under Keynesian economic theory, the way you got out of a recession was for the government, as Reagan would say, to spend money. And the more money you spent, the higher the economy rose, but the more inflation you had. But if you had very low activity in the economy, inflation would be very low because there was just no activity. Well, in the late 70s, we had stagflation, a stagnant economy with high inflation. And right now we have high inflation. And if these tax revenue signals are correct, it means we're turning more into a stagnant economy or stagflation. All right. So it's just another reason why I think they know, Biden's people know, he's got no place to go on this. He's stuck. There's nothing going to rescue him from the next 6 months, which so the only thing they can do is make your life worse. Consider, I hadn't thought of this before, but consider it like the case of POW camp guards, right? As the enemy closes in, they can do one of two things. They can just leave and give up and or become more friendly to the prisoners, hoping the prisoners won't take it out on them so much if they're a little bit more friendly, or they can say, to heck with it. We're going to lose. I'm going to make your life a living hell until they get here, which is what some of the Japanese guards did. So that's kind of the situation we are. All right. I wanted to jump to kind of a different thought here for our last real segment. And that is, what would a Trump second term look like? And again, we're going by signals here. If you look at Midway, the Battle of Midway in 1942, we had fantastic intelligence, but even then we didn't know exactly where the Japanese were going to hit or when. It was an educated guess. And as one guy put it in one of the movies, you know that all the wedding planners on an island are booked. You know that all of the orchestra on the island is booked. You know that all the caterers are booked. So you know there's going to be a wedding or a party. You may not know where it is or when it is, but you're absolutely sure there's going to be a wedding or a party soon. Well, that's where we are with a lot of these signals. So consider this signal. Last week, Mike Johnson, little Mikey, came out and he got fully on board with Trump. Word is that they met. And in his statement, he said they have a three-pronged approach to respond to all this lawfare against President Trump. Now, isn't it interesting? This lawfare has been going on how long? Since late 2023. It's been going on for over 6-7 months. And this is the first time that Congress even noticed it. So they're going to respond. They're going to get tough. And their prongs don't amount to anything. It's more hearings. It's more investigations. They can't really do much, even if they impeach somebody like Merrick Garland or somebody like that. The Senate's not going to convict them. So I understand. Some of you have been very angry about this, but I understand they can't do a whole lot. The House only has 2 weapons right now, only 2. 1, they can impeach but not convict, and 2, they can shut down government. And there just are not enough Republicans in the caucus willing to shut down government. So really, they have an empty quiver. All they can do is hold investigations and expose, which is what Andy Biggs told me in a private meeting in 2022, right before he was reelected. I said, Congressman, you guys are going to go in with a small majority. You can't pass anything that the Senate will pass and that Biden would sign off on. So passing legislation is meaningless. You can impeach, but the Senate will never convict anybody you impeach. So that's meaningless. I said, so the only last power you guys have is to shut down the government. So what are you going to do? And I'll give Andy great credit here. He didn't lie to me. He could have started into political speak and started lying. He looked at me, he said, he didn't disagree with me. He said, we have great power to investigate. He said, the committee chairmen are very powerful and they can investigate. And that is what the Republicans have done for 2 years, is they've used the one power that they can use, which is to investigate. Anyway, back to Mikey Johnson. So Mikey Johnson is suddenly on board Trump. What does that take? They think Trump's going to win. There was a story from Ronald Reagan's era. And when he came in January 1981, he was given a binder of all of Jimmy Carter's executive orders. And they said, Mr. President, would you look this over and tell us which ones you want to cancel? They came back, he handed them back the binder, and they start flipping through it, and they see no red marks on anything. And they're, what's going on? They go all the way to the very last page, and the very last page in giant red, Reagan had written, cancel them all. That's the first thing you're going to see. Midnight or whatever it is, the minute after Trump is sworn in 2025, he's going to get a binder like that from his staff, and he's going to cancel every single executive order. A big difference from 2016, maybe even 2020 to now, Trump now has the backing of groups like the Heritage Foundation. Heritage was crucial when Reagan came in because Heritage had developed this whole outline for what his government should accomplish. And it was only a matter of Reagan putting specific people into specific tasks to accomplish those things. Well, Heritage now has gotten behind Trump. It took them 8 years, but they finally got behind President Trump, and they developed such a package for him. So that's number two. That's very important. Third, Bannon is behind this Project 2025 wide search for talent. So look on the web for something like the Project 2025 or 2025 project. And they're looking for people now to staff the administration, which they weren't doing in 16. And we could go on and on about all the impediments that the bureaucracy threw up to the first Trump term. That's not going to happen again. One other thing is very important is Trump can cut government. And even before he left, he was in the process of cutting a lot of government. First, he has a plan to turn a lot of these government jobs into Schedule F jobs. Now, a civil servant under our system cannot be fired. They have a job for life until they are so bad at it, they must be removed. And Milton Friedman once went through a process. It had a giant chart about 6 feet long of the steps it took to replace a civil servant who was constantly late for work and absent. It took something like 150 different meetings, warning steps, and so forth just to fire one person. Well, Trump's going to convert a lot of those jobs into what are called Schedule F jobs, which are contractor jobs, and you can fire contractors right away. Bannon has had a great idea of buying out the people at the top of many of these jobs, the secretary of the bureau or whoever it is that's heading the bureau, and then eliminating that job entirely when that person is bought out. It would cost us something up front to get these people out, but nevertheless, it would sure pay off if you start. It's akin to cutting a tree from the top down, right? So that along with Schedule F. And then the third thing that Trump was doing prior to him leaving was starting to move bureaus and agencies out of Washington, D.C. Folks, this is critical because this will have many of those people retiring automatically. They only want to be in D.C. because they're among fellow hive members. They're in there going to the same cocktail parties and meeting people, and it's a social thing. But if you put them in Pig's Knuckle, Arkansas, or Hawaii, New Mexico, or Scotts Bluff, Nebraska, they're going to leave. So these are a few things that will happen that will begin to reduce government, and the more you reduce government, the less talent you need. All right, we have one more word from our sponsor here, and then I'm going to get back into a little of this and wrap up maybe with a good band story. Folks, it's another day and another breaking news day. I've just given you a whole bunch of the good and bad news, and it's not because people don't know what's happening that they're going around. They'd rather talk about anything than talk about what's really going on. You know people like this. The media pundits and talking heads just don't want you paying attention. If you pay attention, you're going to see what's really happening. And you know the truth is being covered up. Look at Tucker Carlson's interview the other night where he alluded to aliens that the government knows about. The real stories, you got to look beyond the headlines, certainly beyond CNN, to get those. So prepare for what's being hidden from you. For the apocalypse. Prepare for what's coming. The next 6 months of hell with My Patriot Supply. Since 2008, My Patriot Supply has helped millions of Americans get ready for the unexpected and even the worst. This is the final week to save $200 off the best-selling 3-month emergency food kits that are flying off the shelves with My Patriot Supply. So get yours at the website preparewithvnn.com. Preparewithvnn.com. Food kit offers over 2,000 calories every day. Plenty of calories to stay afloat here. Plus ultra durable 4-layer packaging and lasts up to 25 years in storage. So even if the next 6 months aren't horrible, you might need them in the future. Who knows when they're going to lock us down again. Order all the kits you need for $200 off and free shipping during the final week of this offer. And you've been warned about what can happen, but don't live in fear. Remember, we're not given the spirit of fear, but a power of love and a sound mind. Take back control of your future, because it's not just about food, folks. It's about freedom. So stock up on these food kits at preparewithvnn.com before time runs out. Preparewithvnn.com. All right. So our final words here. What about vengeance versus justice? Bannon said last week to an interviewer, the war has expanded, that they can't go back to the way it was. You can't drop a nuke and think that the other side that has nukes isn't going to drop theirs. People, and I'm even talking about a lot of the so-called undecideds, I think a lot of people out there are going to demand some justice from the Trump administration. That doesn't mean vengeance. I'm not envisioning Nuremberg-type gallows, but I do envision some sort of held accountability trials. And I do envision some sort of jail terms for some people. Bannon also intimated, and I found this pretty interesting, civil rights charges against Boast and Bragg, Alvin Bragg up there and Letitia James, that they have been guilty of violating President Trump's civil rights. And so you can go after a lot of these people with civil rights charges. It's pretty obvious that Jack Smith is in legal trouble for doing a lot of things illegally down there with the documents case, fraudulently misrepresenting documents, moving documents around without telling the defense. And it's also pretty obvious that Fani Willis is in deep legal trouble in the Georgia case. So people like this have to be brought to account. You've got to make sure that there is justice, not vengeance, but you do have to make sure that the public begins to again embrace the notion that we are all a nation under law. One law, not one for the rich and powerful and the elites, and not one for us right? All right. I like to end these by talking a little bit about my rock and roll days. Those of you who don't know, back in the day, I was a rock drummer, I played all throughout high school, played all throughout college, had terrible grades because I was always playing at night. Went on the road literally after I got my college degree in political science, played on the road for several years. Eventually got with bands that were playing a lot of original music, and we were opening for such groups as Steppenwolf, the James Gang, Savoy Brown. As I think I mentioned last time, The Who sat through our set at the Troubadour, and a very drunk Pete Townsend slapped me on the back when it was done, said, "Hey, good show, what?" We were the guests of the Allman Brothers at their behind the stage show at Cincinnati. Got to meet just all sorts. I knocked over one of the birds, Jim McGinn, just knocked him over in the record plant studios. We were given a tour of that studio, and he came out of a kind of hidden door, little guy. But above and beyond that, our singer thought that the way you made it in Hollywood, and it's not a bad philosophy, was you find and hang out with famous people, and that sooner or later, if they get to like you, they will introduce you to their agents and their A&R men and all sorts of other people who can help your career. So to that end, our singer would get these famous star maps of Hollywood, and we would just drive around hoping to meet people, and it worked. I met so many people. I met Lou Rawls. I met Gabe Kaplan. Remember him from Welcome Back, Cotter. One day we were driving around. Doug, our singer, goes, "That's Groucho's house over there." Well, we pull up next to the front gate. Now, lo and behold, Groucho Marx comes out. He was in a wheelchair, but his nurse brought him out, and we sat and talked with Groucho Marx for a few minutes. But the one I'll never forget is we were going through some of these little suburbs. I mean, they look no different. They're not the big Bel Air mansions. These were kind of smaller, middle-class looking American homes. And we're just driving around in our van, a bunch, 5 long-haired hippies, and we see Betty White out there watering her lawn. So we pull up next to them and start talking with Betty White, and she was so nice. She was just wonderful. She's talking to these 5 long-haired hippies while she's watering her lawn, making jokes and so on and so forth. And we thanked her profusely. And then we drove on. Another time, we were sitting at a stoplight, and this black Mercedes with a man and a woman, convertible, man and woman sitting in it, pull up next to us. And man's in a suit, sunglasses. I'm not sure. They looked like they could have been going to a funeral. I'm not sure. And but the woman, black dress, and had a scarf, sunglasses, but flaming red hair. You know who that was. It was Lucille Ball. And so in our best Ricky Ricardo voices, we all hang out the window and go, hey, Lucy. And she laughed and waved at us. So we got to meet all sorts of amazing people. And, later on, it didn't stop there. When I went back to college to get my PhD at the University of California, Santa Barbara, I got involved in the Young Republicans group there. But I was older because I'd been playing rock music for several years, right? So I was kind of an elder statesman. And so they looked to me to kind of be the leader in even though they had a president, they looked to me to kind of be the leader in some of these things that they put on. And we brought in William F. Buckley Jr. to speak there in Santa Barbara. And lo and behold, yours truly got to introduce William F. Buckley Jr. To a crowd there at Santa Barbara. And he said that Mr. Schweikart proves that being a young conservative is not an oxymoron, something like that. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, but William F. Buckley Jr. was an amazing piano player. He said they had a grand piano at the house of the home, the people who put him up. He sat down and just played classical music without any sight reading, any music at all. Amazing. And so that was really something. Well, guys, it's been fun. Thanks for having me back. Thanks to Ed Henry for having me back. Remember, if you're into history, you want a full curriculum in U.S. or world history, we've got it at the Wild World of History. High schoolers, I've had 8th graders do it. Full curriculum with me teaching all classes. And remember to pick up my newest book, Patriots History of Globalism. We have a great offer with Patriots History in the United States available on the website. It's a wonderful book about full of history and full of hope. Tells you why globalism is on its heels. We got them on the run. I'll see you back here again.